Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Utility Sports. Today, we are going to be talking about the 2021 NBA trade deadline that is coming March 25th. We are just over a month away. So, yes, it looks like this video might be coming a little early, but actually, trade rumors are starting quite soon this year. We've already had a couple moves. One big blockbuster deal with James Harden getting traded to the Brooklyn Nets, another big trade with Derrick Rose getting traded to the New York Knicks. And now we've got a few other stars on the market, guys like Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, a few other big names as well that I think not enough people are talking about. So I'm going to walk us through today some guys to watch on the trade deadline. What we're going to really be looking to see here, what teams are going to be looking to make moves, both winning moves, buying at the deadline, teams that are going to be looking to offload contracts and sell, and also one team in the middle that I think is a real pivot team when it comes to the trade deadline, who could be winners and losers when it comes to the moves. So let's take a look first at some teams that are going to be looking to buy. One is going to be the Dallas Mavericks. They are currently below 500. They have not had as nearly good of a year as many as expected for them. Luka Doncic had been thrown into MVP conversations, and despite his recent individual greatness and his overall greatness throughout the season, the Mavericks haven't been winning enough games to put themselves in playoff position yet at this point. Mark Cuban, Donnie Nelson they're not going to accept that. They're going to be aggressive, try and make a move probably to get themselves into position to make the playoffs. However, it's also important to note that they want 2021 free agency flexibility. They want some cap space. They want to be able to go and maybe sign a guy. So any move they make will have some accordance to that. Another team to watch is the Boston Celtics. Yes, their roster is really complete. They have a lot of nice players, but they do have that $28 million trade exception that they got for when they traded Gordon Hayward. Interesting thing to note here, that trade exception that they have is not enough money to bring in a guy like Andre Drummond. It's not enough for Bradley Beal. Those are not going to be flexible options for the Boston Celtics at this point. They do not have the ways to really get to those players. The trade exception does not cover that, and you cannot combine a contract with the trade exception to bring them in. So that's interesting to note, but it does open the door to them bringing in maybe a couple nice players in a 3-team deal, really nice player in a 2-team deal. We'll get into them a little bit here. Another team, the New York Knicks, we already saw them buy Derrick Rose. Expect Tom Thibodeau and management there, Leon Rose, to look into maybe improving this roster a little bit more in a hope for the playoffs. The Toronto Raptors, they've played themselves now into the 7th seed out in the East. They're linked to Andre Drummond. That's probably the lead guy that they're interested in. However, there's some issues with that approach. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. And a team that's linked to the Raptors here now is going to be the Los Angeles Clippers, in my opinion. They're going to be looking for a point guard this trade deadline. I fully believe that. And the guy I think that they're going to be after is actually Kyle Lowry, the starting point guard for the Toronto Raptors. Do they have enough to get a deal done there? I'm not sure that's going to involve Andre Drummond, in my opinion, from the Cavaliers. That's a complicated deal. I actually have a 14 trade mocked up for that we'll talk about here in this video. In addition, teams that are going to be looking to make winning moves, the Miami Heat, the Chicago Bulls possibly, the Washington Wizards, even though they've played so terribly, I think that they're going to try and make a move that can help set them up for the future in the right direction. I also think that the Brooklyn Nets are going to be looking to maybe buy low on a big man. I think that'll be an interesting thing to monitor. Now some teams that are going to be selling, the Houston Rockets, a recent 6-game losing skid. The moment Christian Wood went out, their season derailed. Victor Oladipo is probably going to be on his way out. I think they're going to look for ways to move John Wall. The Sacramento Kings, another team. The Cleveland Cavaliers, we obviously know. Detroit Pistons, they've already made a sell move in Derrick Rose. They're going to look to continue to do that. The New Orleans Pelicans, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Orlando Magic even make this list as other teams that are selling. So now let's look into what they could be giving up, these teams that are selling. The Rockets, I had mentioned Victor Oladipo. He is the obvious guy that they're going to want to move. He's on an expiring contract. He could make a lot of sense there in Boston. I talked about that $28 million trade exception. The Celtics could give up a second-round pick or even a low-end first to the Houston Rockets straight up for Victor Oladipo. They do not need to match money because of that trade exception. They could bring him in outright and not have to worry about matching money there. They could keep that roster intact and add a guard/forward into the mix very easily. I think that Victor Oladipo will be on the Celtics radar. Two other guys I think will be on the Celtics radar coming from teams that are selling are actually Harrison Barnes from the Sacramento Kings. I know there's rumors that say they don't want to move him. I think there's a little bit of smoke there. I think they're trying to make it seem like they don't want to part with him to drive up his value a little bit. He's having a pretty good year for them, but he would fit nicely into that trade exception for Boston. And another guy is Evan Fournier from the Magic. He's on an expiring contract, opted into the last year of his deal with the Orlando Magic this offseason. And this would be a good way for the Boston Celtics to get a little reinforcement this year as they continue to progress Erin Smith as a backup wing there in Boston. You get a little bit of help this year, and then you don't have him under contract. You don't have to commit money to him. That was the ultimate reason why they didn't want to go with Gordon Hayward this year, is Hayward wanted an extension long-term deal with them. They weren't willing to work that out because they are going to have to commit so much money to Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and the rest of the gang there in Boston that it's hard to find something long-term. So that's why Evan Fournier on a rental for the remainder of the year does make sense, especially when you're not going to have to give up a very high asset to bring him in. Now looking at the Dallas Mavericks, what are some players that they could be after? Andre Drummond's going to be one guy that they're after. He fits in nicely. They could get to that money by giving up James Johnson, Dwight Powell, and then you maybe throw in a second-round pick or two. I think that's kind of the direction of that trade that the Mavericks would be looking. Otherwise, they're going to be one of the front runners for Drummond if he is bought out there in Cleveland. Another player that they're going to actually be interested in, my opinion, is Spencer Dinwiddie. And yes, I know he's injured. He has a torn ACL. He is out for the season. But the reason why is if they make a move for him at the deadline, and this would probably come in a 3-team deal here in which the Brooklyn Nets would get a player, say like JaVale McGee from Cleveland, and then Dallas throws 2 second-round picks, one to Cleveland to pay for McGee and one to Brooklyn to pay for Dinwiddie. Then at that point, you're getting Spencer Dinwiddie, who's expiring. The Nets are going to be in a lot of issues with the luxury tax. They don't have the means to really keep Spencer Dinwiddie, even with his bird rights. So this way, the Nets are essentially getting paid to give up his bird rights to Dallas, and Dallas could go over the salary cap this offseason to re-sign him back. I think there's a lot of value in that. Dallas needs a secondary playmaker. They need a guy who can come off the bench and, really fill up the scoreboard. That's been a big issue for Dallas this year with the absence of Seth Curry. I think that makes a lot of sense in a variety of ways. Now let's go into that 4-team deal I was talking about here. And this is actually one that I put together here on the NBA trade machine. And what it is the Cleveland Cavaliers, Toronto Raptors, LA Clippers, and Indiana Pacers get together on a 4-team deal here. In this deal, the Cleveland Cavaliers get Jeremy Lin, Aaron Baines, and Keelan Martin, in addition to 2 second-round picks from the Los Angeles Clippers. And in turn, they give up Andre Drummond. That is the entire deal for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They bring in those young players, some of those depth pieces, and 2 second-round picks for Andre Drummond, who they only gave up a 2023 second-rounder for last trade deadline. The Raptors, in turn, get Andre Drummond, Patrick Beverley, and Patrick Patterson. Obviously, Drummond coming from the Cavs, Patterson and Beverley coming from the Clippers. The Clippers here get Kyle Lowry, their franchise starting point guard, the guy that they're going to need next to Kawhi Leonard. We saw him win with Kawhi Leonard in Toronto. I think this move makes a lot of sense for the Clippers, trying to emulate what the Raptors had done 2 years ago in the NBA Finals. They brought in Serge Ibaka this offseason to help with that. Now they bring in the point guard that won a championship with Kawhi Leonard there in Kyle Lowry. And the Pacers, in turn, get off of Jeremy Lamb and Keelan Martin and buy in on Marcus Morris Sr. The Clippers had to move on from Morris to bring in a guy like Kyle Lowry, that contract. The Pacers jump in here like they always do, getting a good contract, a good player that'll fit long-term there. He's under contract. They don't have to worry about paying him long-term. He's going to come in at about $14-15 million a year, and that's going to be a really nice wing option for them moving forward to complement what they already have in the front court with Domantas Sabonis and Miles Turner. So that is one 4-team deal that I have mocked up at this point. In addition to that, a team that I think is going to be looking to buy is the Miami Heat, and they're going to be all in on Nemanja Bjelica. I think ultimately at the end of the day, he will be a Miami Heat. They're really missing Jay Crowder this year. I had talked about that last year when they traded for Andre Iguodala, that Jay Crowder was actually the better player in that deal for them. Crowder went on to Phoenix this year on the mid-level exception for 3 years. And now the Heat have really missed his absence, I think. I think that his absence has really hurt them defensively and also offensively, having a 4 who can stretch the floor consistently and can play real perimeter defense. I think Bjelica gives you a lot of that. He's a guy who has a career three-point percentage of 39%, can put the ball in the hoop flat out. He's going to play well off of Jimmy Butler. He's going to play well off of guys like Kendrick Nunn, Goran Dragic. He's the guy that makes the most sense to come into Miami in their hopes to getting back to an NBA Finals. Does he move the needle necessarily in doing that? I don't think so, not with the Brooklyn Nets being the way that they are now. Milwaukee Bucks look better this year. However, the Miami Heat are going to try and be competitive, and the move to do that is Nemanja Bjelica. Now, for the Bulls and Wizards, I'm a little shook up about who they're going to go after. We've heard some rumors about the Bulls going after possibly Lonzo Ball. I think that is a very real possibility. I also think the Clippers might be interested in Lonzo Ball. I don't know exactly what his market looks like. I think the Pelicans are also going to be looking to shop Eric Bledsoe and JJ Redick. I think JJ Redick's going to have some value for teams possibly like the Sixers. A reunion there makes a lot of sense. I also think some of these other teams, not necessarily the Miami Heat, but say the Boston Celtics could look to add him. The Dallas Mavericks really need a shooter. He could make some sense there as well. But at this point, I think that the most likely player to get dealt from the Pelicans is actually Lonzo Ball. We've seen them kind of shift a little bit to Nickeil Alexander-Walker getting a few more minutes. We've also seen their rookie point guard there getting a few more minutes as well. That is something to monitor. The Oklahoma City Thunder are also going to be looking to sell George Hill and probably Al Horford in addition to Trevor Ariza this trade deadline. Now, do any of those guys have homes? I'm not sure about it. Does George Hill have a team that's really going to be interested in him? Possibly the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't necessarily know if I for sure see that happening, though. I think that Horford is a player that maybe 1 year down the road when his contract's a little bit shorter yet and there's a little bit less commitment to his money, that makes some sense for a team to buy, but I don't see him getting dealt this trade deadline. The Magic, I talked about Evan Fournier and his fit around the league. I think the Dallas Mavericks are going to be another team interested in Evan Fournier. Does he get moved? I ultimately do think he does. The Magic just have been derailed by injuries this year. Jonathan Isaac out the whole year. Starting point guard Markelle Fultz out the whole year. The Orlando Magic can really accelerate their rebuild here by moving on from Fournier, tanking out the rest of the season just a little bit, improving their pick slightly, getting into about top 7, top 8 pick in this year's draft, a very strong draft class. And then you also maybe get a nice little asset back from Fournier, gives you some flexibility. You can make a couple moves. And I think that this really opens up the door for the Orlando Magic to build back stronger around Vucevic moving forward, especially when that roster is healthy. The Cleveland Cavaliers, Andre Drummond's the guy to watch. Does he get moved? Ultimately, I don't think he does get traded. I think he is a buyout guy at the end of the day. The fact that the Boston Celtics don't have the trade exception to bring him in makes this a lot tougher. It's either going to be the Dallas Mavericks or nobody for Andre Drummond, in my opinion. I talked about that 4-team deal. Now, are the Toronto Raptors willing to make a move for Drummond and give up Kyle Lowry? To me, initially, I don't think so. However, the Raptors really badly need that center position. They've committed money to Fred VanVleet. The only way that they feel comfortable doing that is if they're going to hand the keys over to VanVleet as their full-time starting point guard. Is that possible? It sure is, but I know for sure they're not going to be interested in giving up Norman Powell in that deal. If they're going to give up anything, it would be Kyle Lowry in a 4-team deal in which they get maybe a low-end draft pick comp back and Andre Drummond, but I just don't necessarily see that being the way that the cookie crumbles. So I think it's either going to be Dallas or nobody, and I ultimately think Dallas isn't going to move their needle too much, and ultimately at the end of the day, the Cleveland Cavaliers will buy out Andre Drummond. Now let's take one moment here and talk about the Detroit Pistons. They moved on from Derrick Rose this year in a trade with the New York Knicks, got in Dennis Smith Jr., a little bit of a project piece, see what he can do in the bubble there in the G League, and also a second-round pick. And I think that was a pretty solid move for the Detroit Pistons. Now you have two guys in that front court that I think are going to be on the trade block here moving forward. That's going to be Mason Plumley. They just signed him this offseason. They're just not winning games. I think Mason Plumley is a nice player. I think he could fit in with a bunch of contenders. However, I just don't really see him being a Detroit Piston for the foreseeable future. I think he'll be on the trade block. And obviously, the guy that's most notable, Blake Griffin. He's not going to be playing in games. They're going to be resting him, trying to leverage his trade value. And all of a sudden, does he have a trade market? I don't believe he does either. I think that he's going to be kind of in that same boat that Kevin Love's been in the past few years, where people look at his contract and say, you know, he's a pretty good player. I think that there could be a real upside to acquiring him, but I don't want to give up assets to get him. And that's how the Pistons are probably going to value him, is they don't want to just give away Blake Griffin for free for two give-me contracts like a Dwight Powell and a James Johnson per se. They're going to want, an actual valuable player back in a deal there. I just don't think it gets done. I think the Pistons end up actually cutting Blake Griffin or buying him out of his contract, essentially allowing him to go to a team on what is going to be the minimum this year as he signs. He'll obviously be getting quite a bit of money from that buyout, so that's not a bad career situation for Blake Griffin. He's going to want to go somewhere to win as well. He's going to be on the buyout. Watch for a team possibly like Boston, maybe Toronto, the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, I know there's some beef there with Steve Ballmer. Blake Griffin's going to have to openly apologize to Steve Ballmer there in any meeting he has with the Clippers if he does want to return to Lob City. But at this point, I think that's kind of the way I'm looking at this. There's going to be a lot of smoke. I think there's going to be more smoke and mirrors than anything this trade deadline. I think we're going to actually have a pretty slow trade deadline with not a ton going on. Expecting Nemanja Bjelica to be one of the first sure guys to get moved. I think Spencer Dinwiddie will be a guy who for sure gets moved. Victor Oladipo as well. But other than that, I think we're going to have a pretty quiet deadline. These star guys like Drummond, Blake Griffin, they're going to be more buyout options just with the nature of their contracts. The difficulty teams will have to get to that $28 million mark to match money here. I just don't really see a lot of teams being willing to pull the trigger on deals like that. They're kind of high risk, low reward in a lot of ways. And I just don't necessarily know if I see a deal getting done for those guys. Let me know in the comments below if you think I missed any teams that were worth talking about. Oh, also, actually, one real quick team. The team in the middle, I forgot to mention, the Atlanta Hawks, John Collins. He is the prized possession to get this trade deadline. He's shooting 41% from three. He's 23 years old. He's a lob threat. He's a backdoor cut threat. He's developing on the perimeter as an offensive player in a lot of ways. Do I see a team giving up a high-end asset for him, though? I don't know if I see that for sure. He has free agency looming ahead of him. He will be restricted, but he's going to get due a lot of money. Does a team pull a trigger on him? I don't know that for sure. I think he could be a guy that the Wizards would really be interested in. I think that a team like the Raptors would be really interested in. I just don't necessarily know if I see a deal getting done there for sure. I think Atlanta's looking to kind of retool this team a little bit. They're not playing as well as many thought they would this year. DeAndre Hunter's injury definitely does not help that situation either. And I think that they're going to look to maybe rebuild this thing around Trae Young a little bit differently. And John Collins just doesn't really fit into that, I'm sure. But I don't know if they have a way to really go about moving him for what the value should be for him. I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, let me know what you thought in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you are new to utility sports. We love having you guys a part of the channel here, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.